Hello, everyone. Well, it has certainly been a while. Way longer than I intended. But there was good reason for it. At least I think it was good reason. I'm not going to go into too much detail because, frankly, it's just a little bit long winded if I did that. But the short version is well, you can see how long the video is. It might not even really be a short version, even as it is, but the shorter version is that I spent a bunch of time in the hospital so far this year, starting all the way back in January. And while I was there, I learned that my kidney function had fallen to 12%. That means, 88% failure at that point. So consequently, I have been on dialysis for several months now, and I do have a very long road ahead of me yet. So I guess technically speaking, it's possible that I can get off of dialysis if I get a kidney transplant in the future. However, I do have to jump through a few hoops before I can get added to the transplant list. And even after that, I've been told that the average wait time is between 5 to 7 years. The good news is that I'm relatively young still, and so I do have time on my side on this. And I also think there could potentially be 3D printed mechanical kidneys coming near, and that could be less than 5 years out. I don't know. Technology is weird. You can go years and years and years with nothing, and then suddenly a breakthrough and everything changes. And there you go. In the meantime, though, dialysis. Dialysis is what's the best word to describe? Oh yeah, boring. I knew nothing about it until it happened to me, but basically how dialysis goes is you sit in a chair. While you're there, your blood gets removed from your body, not all of it at once, obviously, but portions of it at a time, and it gets into a machine, and the machine cleans it, and then it gets returned to you. So that part I kind of knew the theory of it, but basically means you're sitting in this chair for that entire process while it's doing that. And for me right now, when you add in the amount of time it takes to get hooked up and then disconnected after it's done, it ends up being about 5 hours per day when I'm doing it, and I have to do it 3 days a week. And there's no vacation from this process. 5 hours, 3 times a week is 15 hours per week. I can still do math, so we got that going. But when you think about it, this machine that I'm hooked up to has to do the same amount of work to clean my blood in that 15 hours per week that your kidneys do for you every second, every minute, every hour, every day, 24 hours a day, for 7 days a week. So 15 hours compressing that entire amount of work. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in that dialysis, and it's a very compressed time frame that you have to have it in. So the other thing that's interesting about dialysis is not just that they're able to remove your blood and clean it. Again, that's the part that everybody kind of knows because we know that it's cleaning your blood. But they're also able to extract excess fluids from your body and just not put them back. And so for me, I've had upwards of 4.5 liters of fluid taken out in a single 5 hour period. And now I know we use freedom units, so for those of you here in the U.S. who are like, I know liters based on I buy 2 liters for a party every once in a while. Just to get you what we're talking about here, a liter of water weighs the same amount as a kilogram. And I mean, there's some variations depending on altitude, things like that, but it's close enough that we can just say that a liter of water is the same as a kilogram of weight or kilogram of mass. So 4.5 liters is the same as 4.5 kilograms. And I know for Americans, again, if liters are at least abstract, but we can kind of figure it out because you can buy a 2 liter bottle at the store. Kilograms, what are those? Well, a kilogram is roughly 2.2 pounds. So 4.5 kilograms times 2.2 pounds gives us 9.9 pounds. which means that when I have the 4.5 liters removed from me, then in a space of 5 hours, I've just lost almost 10 pounds of weight. And that does some very interesting things. Losing 10 pounds of fluid in 5 hours is, there's no way around it. It's never a fun experience. It's a pretty horrible experience because your body's not used to losing that much weight that quickly. And so a lot of what's happening to me recently is that I go into cramps while I'm getting my dialysis done. One time I also got really, really lightheaded. And for me, it actually feels sometimes like my sinuses are getting pulled out. Um, but that one time, well, I get lightheaded quite a few times on there. But there's one time I actually got bad enough that I literally passed out while I was in the dialysis chair. In fact, let me go into that just a little bit here because I find it a very interesting thing. See, basically what happened is I started feeling really, really dizzy. And I sat up a bit in the chair and I looked over at one of the nurses. And he glanced over at me, and he's sitting in this little kiosk about, I'd say, about 30 feet away from me. And he glanced over my direction. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I was going to respond, "No, I'm really feeling lightheaded." And instead of saying it, I just kind of closed my eyes, and suddenly he was right next to me. And I could feel somebody shoving oxygen into my nose. They're pulling my surgical mask off because I do have to wear a mask while I'm in dialysis. It's no longer required for COVID, but it is required because I use a centerline catheter, and we got to make sure that I don't get any infection in there. Um, just as a quick aside, the centerline catheter means it's plugged straight into my jugular vein. It's actually right there is where it enters. This is actually where the needle is under the vein a little bit. It enters a little bit underneath it. But it means that if I get an infection at this point, and if I'm coughing or sneezing, dripping with my sinuses, and that gets in there and I get an infection, that's straight to my heart, which is roughly about there. So we're talking just a couple inches on the jugular. It's going straight there. So that makes it somewhat dangerous. So basically, again, going back to this, they were pulling that surgical mask off because they needed to see my face. They were putting oxygen in my nose, and I was reaching up trying to fix it because I could tell they had it wrong, and it was sliding over to the side. And I could hear the nurse, the same one that had been sitting over at the table about 30 feet away. I could hear him saying, his blood pressure is still crashing. We need to get it up. And then he saw me moving, and he said, "Watch out, he's going to throw up." Because I kind of leaned over to the side, and I realized there was a trash can there. And I was like, I'm not going to throw up. And right when I thought that, I started throwing up. So thankfully, one of the nurses had gotten one of those sickness bags and put it in front of me. She actually brought two over for that. And it was just right there. And at the same time, I then start feeling like a cold rag getting put on the back of my neck. I started breaking out into a huge sweat. And it's like everything was just soaking through. Like all my clothes ended up being soaked with sweat at that point. And, I'm sitting there and I kind of recover after throwing up. And I remember it's like, okay, well, now I'm not as dizzy anymore. And I kind of sit back in the chair and I remember thinking to myself, wow, these guys were pretty quick. That was just a couple of seconds and they were just on point. And I kind of just lay back and I'm starting the process. They turned the machine off where it was no longer pulling anything at all. It was just kind of cleaning the blood at this point. And so they were just cycling blood at that point. They weren't trying to pull any more fluids off. And I was close towards the end, so they didn't actually turn it back on for that. They just ended up giving me all the blood that was still out back. So they cleaned it and returned it, but they were not pulling any more fluids off of my body that day. And so I was able to recover from that point on fairly quickly. But as I was sitting there getting the rest of my blood pumped back in, I started thinking, wait a second, this doesn't add up. See, remember, the nurse, when I had talked to him, he was 30 feet away. Now, he could literally have run that 30 feet over in just a couple of seconds, right? And that's how I felt. It was like I felt I closed my eyes, and it was just a couple of seconds. But then I remembered he had said his blood pressure is still crashing. And the word still was there. And the reason why that becomes important is it means that when he was checking at that time, it was at least the second time that he'd done so. And the machine that does the cuff and all that takes at least 10 seconds to measure what your blood pressure is on average. And so that meant that we're talking at least 20 seconds where I have no memory of it. And the fact that the nurses got there so quickly makes a lot more sense when you realize I don't know exactly how long they actually took to get there. They could have been there after a minute, and it felt like it wasn't. So that's when I realized I didn't just close my eyes for a second. It had been for an extended period of time. Obviously not hours, and probably not even minutes, but I don't know how long it was. And that put me at a surreal kind of perspective there. I've never missed a significant chunk of my life before in time without knowing that I had missed a bunch of time, other than if I have lost consciousness, right? And that's the only time. You know, like going to sleep, you wake up and it doesn't really feel like a lot of time has passed, but you can tell from the outside with the sun that you go to sleep dark, it's suddenly bright, things like that. And we're just used to that, so we know that a lot of time has passed. But when you really think about it, we don't really feel that conscious passing of time. Now, I don't want to get too much into that because it would be a fun topic, and I'll probably go into some more details on that in a future video. Discussing it on philosophical views of time or something like that. But for now, it's more of a side point to this. Basically, all I wanted to say at this point is dialysis isn't what I would define as fun. In fact, it's almost, but not quite, the exact opposite of fun on there. So even on days when I don't cramp or I don't end up lightheaded at all, and you're just pulling fluid, cleaning my blood, that's still taking my blood out, and that does mean it's taking my blood sugars. It takes protein from my body. It leaves me feeling dehydrated when it's done. None of these things are fun. And actually, because my kidneys are so hampered, they're not completely gone. I am able to produce a little bit of urine output on my own, but it's a very tiny amount compared to what I need to get rid of fluids. So I also have fluid restrictions. That means I can't drink more than 1,500 milliliters of fluid per day, or 1.5 liters. So I can't even drink a 2-liter bottle of diet soda or something. If I wanted to do that in a day, that is too much fluid. And this fluid restriction isn't just what I'm drinking. It also includes anything I eat. So that means no more soup at all, unless I want to compensate by not drinking any fluids with that soup. But for me, it's too difficult to figure out exactly how much water is in a soup if I'm not making it myself. And frankly, if I'm making a soup, it's usually going to be a canned soup, and I don't know how much fluid was in it. I know how much water I add. I don't know how much was already there. And so it's too much, it's too difficult, is a better way of saying it. It's too difficult to actually compare and tell and know that you're not going over. And so what this means is basically, for as far back now as I can remember, I have been thirsty because I can't get enough fluid where I don't feel thirsty. I get enough where I'm not going to die. And some of this is, I'm sure, psychological, but it is still the psychology of feeling thirsty. And basically right now I can get 3 500 milliliter bottles of water and have one per meal, right, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But that is literally everything. I can't have a snack in the middle and drink extra fluids in there unless I'm limiting even further one of those water bottles. And if you're thirsty and you've ever had a 500 milliliter serving, it's basically like the one serving small bottles. It's I want to say about 16 ounces in Freedom units, but it's not exactly, but it's going to be close to that. But if you take the 500 milliliters at one time, if you're thirsty, you can slam that whole bottle and then still feel thirsty very easily. And consequently, since I don't know when the last time I wasn't thirsty, I also have to add, we're in the middle of a heat wave at the moment, which most of the country is. But let's just say that because if you're in a position where you're always thirsty, if you're in the middle of a heat wave, for me, I don't think I've ever yet gotten to the exact 1500, except for there was a couple times where I've been sick, and if I'm laying in bed all day and not feeling well, so not even able to keep anything down, that's been the only time that I've been able to keep to that 1500 milliliter restriction on fluids for sure. And otherwise, I usually am getting at least 2 liters per day of fluid throughout the entire day, especially with this heat wave. And what that means is, let me preface, the medical staff is very nice. In fact, compared to the hospital, these guys are amazing. And there's a huge difference in the way that you're going to be treated at the hospital, where they're expecting you to be there maybe a couple of days, but then you're going to get discharged. So again, they're professional. This time around, there's no real complaints that I can have. I have had extremely bad experiences at hospitals though, and there is that difference between somebody who's expecting you to leave and never have to deal with you again, and the people at the dialysis clinic who know that you have to be there 3 times a week for an indefinite amount of time. So they do treat me a lot different at the dialysis clinic. But that said, there are still those experiences with these guys too, because you come in and you've had too many gains, and the gains they interpret no matter what as you've drank too much fluid since the last time we had this. Now, that's another issue that I might get into if people are interested in the topic and want me to delve more details. Um, but I understand it. You know, if you eat a heavy meal, they're going to assume that was just a bunch of fluid. And it's not a bad assumption in general because, first of all, most of your weight is from fluid, even in your food. And if you do happen to eat a lot of food, well, the next time after this current one, I will have had a movement and gotten rid of that. It's not going to stay in my stomach other than what converts into like fat. And the fluid, on the other hand, which I cannot remove fast enough from my kidneys, that is going to be much more of an issue. So I understand the reasoning behind it, but I also know that there are certain times where they think that it's mostly fluid, and I know I just had a bunch of meat, for example, and that's going to weigh something. It can easily weigh an entire kilo on there for having breakfast and lunch before I go into an afternoon dialysis session. But regardless of it, they interpret it all as fluid gains, and therefore they get upset. Um, some of the people who are doing this are nicer than others, but some of the nurses they will say things like, you know, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get heart failure? Are you trying to self-terminate here? Incidentally, I kind of despise that YouTube is making me use fake words like self-terminate when everybody knows what it really should be. But you know, anyway, that's what Google wants. So you know, whatever. Um, and again, the people who say this, I'm not trying to do it as an overly critical thing because they are actually approaching it because they're concerned. They don't want me to die of heart failure, and they want me to have the lower weight. And to be completely open and true, when the fluids go down on me, aside from feeling dehydrated, that part subjectively I despise. That's just, it's very hard. But everything else feels better. It literally does. I feel more energy. I do feel healthier. I can breathe easier because the fluid isn't just pushing on my lungs and things like that. So objectively, I have markers that I can point to and go, yes, I do feel better when I don't have this extra fluid lying around. But the fact that I know they're going to yell at me still does end up with a psychological impact. Um, Basically, because of how hard it is for me to stay at that 1500 milliliters maximum fluid retention or fluid gains, for the first time ever in my life, I have actually experienced guilt after drinking. And I anticipated when I was younger that perhaps someday I would drink a beer and feel guilty because I'm not yet 21. Now, that never actually happened for me. I didn't drink any alcohol illegally in my life. But another thing is maybe I would feel guilty because I decided to drink a sugary soda. And after I had diabetes, that would be a bad thing. especially if it's like during a time where I don't have insulin. So I might feel guilty on that, but I never did that either. No, what I feel guilty for is for drinking a cup of water, regular old water. And I feel guilty because now I'm over 2 liters and I'm supposed to be at 1,500 milliliters. And I know I'm going to get yelled at for being over on my gains. And that is a genuine weird new experience. I'll tell you, I never expected drinking a cup of water. There's nothing immoral with that, but I'm now suddenly feeling guilty because I'm like, I'm going over and I'm too thirsty to not wait for another day before I can drink at another level. And I know that the next day is going to be the same, and it's going to keep adding. So that's one of the ways that this experience has been a real eye opener. But there's more experiences too. See, after the hospital, I ended up going to a physical therapy rehab center, and so I was actually staying there overnight. They had meals and stuff, and what's interesting is between the hospital and then the rehab center combined, I was actually out of my apartment for a full 6 weeks. Thankfully, my brother was able to come. He fed and watered my cats for me while I was not able to. But even in the rehab center, where this became an issue is I was mostly in bed that whole time, even as I was saying, in the rehab, because they did the physical therapy, but that was scheduled for usually between 30 minutes and an hour in any particular day. And that was it. The rest of the time, I'm sitting laying in bed watching TV, or potentially I would have been up in a wheelchair because that was lying around. But I'm not really moving anywhere. I'm not doing anything. And as a result, first from having to lay in the bed in the hospital, and then going to the physical therapy and ending up in the same basic state, I atrophied a lot with my muscles, and that's just the way it was. All I did is watch TV, get sick of watching Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, things like that. But the result is that by March of this year, I literally was in a wheelchair because I couldn't walk without using a walker, and at that point, the maximum distance was building up to getting a 300 feet per day on a walker. And at the point where I'm in the wheelchair, it was difficult even to do 100 feet at that point. So I remember them taking me from the wheelchair, loading me into a van, taking me over to the dialysis clinic, same one I go to now, unloading me from the van. And because I had physical therapy and I'm sitting in a wheelchair, by the time I got to the chair, I literally couldn't stand out of the wheelchair. The same nurse who was checking my blood pressure and all that, he actually literally had to grab my belt loops, lifting me up and carrying me to that move out of the chair into a different chair so they could hook me up and start doing dialysis. And then when dialysis is done, they had to reverse the process, lift me out of the chair, get me to the wheelchair, and get me back in. So that's how bad things had atrophied at that point. And I built up, like I said, to that 300 feet of walking with a walker. So I no longer qualified for a wheelchair through insurance at that point because I could make it that far with a walker. But I hadn't been able to climb a flight of stairs while I'm still there. But that is when the insurance company decided, you have to leave. You can't stay there anymore. We're not going to pay for it. And I couldn't pay out of pocket. And all of the doctors that were there are like, he's not ready to go. They held a peer-to-peer call with my insurance company, and the insurance still said, nope, we're not paying anymore. He can walk to the 300 feet, so we don't view this as an issue where he's going to have problems. Of course, they didn't realize that my apartment isn't on ground floor, first of all. Secondly, there is no handicap accessibilities in the building I'm at. And if you're wondering how bad was it when I mentioned that not being able to climb stairs, well, my brother happened on the day that this happened. He also happened to be coming down to feed my cats that day anyway. And so instead of doing that, he actually came over and picked me up and drove me over. And I got out of the car. I was pushing the walker to get over to the stairs, and I was like, well, this isn't too bad. I can walk. Took the first step, and I knew at that point that I would not be able to climb the entire flight of stairs. It just wasn't going to happen. It was one of those things where I could tell how weak my legs were. I was able to get up that first step. I got up to the second step and fell, like not completely down, but my knees buckled is a better way to say it. My knees buckled, and I knew I wasn't going to climb anymore. I asked my brother, "Can you give me a push? We'll count on three. I'll just pull on the banister and you push from behind." And we got up a couple more steps that way. But again, I knew at that point, I'm like, this is impossible. I'm not able to get up these stairs. What I actually ended up doing is I sat down, and then sitting down, I was like, well, I can kind of push with my feet as if I'm doing a leg press. And because I'm pushing both feet up at the same time, and instead of trying to climb one foot up at one time, I had more strength combined, and I was able to kind of scoot up, get to the next step, move my feet up and scoot up again, and just kind of did a leg press up. And that's when I ran into the second issue, which is when you're at the landing, doing this, you can't stand. I had no legs to get back to my feet. But thankfully, my brother was there, and then a neighbor just happened to be coming out of the apartment complex at the same time. And together, they were able to help pick me up so I could get to my feet, get the walker out, and then get into the actual apartment itself. So that was just the first day out of the rehab center, and literally it's impossible to climb the stairs on my own. And the very next day, which would have been less than 12 hours after the time I got home, I had to climb back down those steps, take a ride over to do dialysis, and then after dialysis, needed to get assistance back up. This time, my boss actually helped me. He'd driven me over, or he'd driven me back from the dialysis after we were done there, and he actually just stood above me on the steps and kind of grabbed one of my hands, and I was pulling with his hand and the banister, and we just went up like that, and we were able to climb all the steps like normal. I put that in quotes for a reason, but relatively like normal. With that. And the good news is that it ended up being only a couple of weeks before I discovered if I used a cane, I could push down with the cane and get enough lift down while moving up with my other foot, because it was more of trying to pull with the banister is, at an angle, and the forward pull is where I lost some of my strength. So being able to push straight down with a cane, I was able to lift up enough to climb the stairs. And so after about 2 weeks, I was able to get upstairs with a cane. But yeah, I was using a cane for doing that. I still have to walk around with a cane today. Not so much here in my apartment. I'm relatively safe. I can lean against walls if I need to. And if I fall over there, hopefully still in camera view, you can kind of see the end of where my sofa is. And if I can get up onto my sofa, which I've proven to myself that I can scoot up to there and then stand from that sofa. So I'm not trapped as long as I'm in my apartment. I am very concerned if I'm outside, if I'm in the parking lot and I fall, or if I lose my balance and go down for any reason, I don't know that I can get back to my feet over there. And the reality is, even though I am stronger now, and I can climb the stairs and stuff, the truth is I am still a whole lot weaker than I was the same time last year. And ironically, when it comes to that, I'm probably, rough estimate, but probably at least 50 pounds lighter, and that's just because of the fluid that has been taken off of me in dialysis. But I'm still weaker on top of that. And again, I don't know how much fluid was taken off, because I don't know exactly how much I weighed before this all started. And I did gain a whole bunch of weight with the fluid, with the swelling before, as my kidneys failed. The urine output drops down, and I especially my legs had a lot of swelling well before I started getting the dialysis. But additional weaknesses on that is, if I kind of hear, you can kind of see it might not show up very well on the camera, but I have a surgical scar here now, because they had to do a fistula. And a fistula, just quickly, is where they combine an artery and a vein together, because they're going to be using that once it matures to do my dialysis. That way they can get rid of the center line and go to that where they just poke some needles in to pull the blood. And they need it to be the same amount of blood that the jugular can do, so that's why they had to do a fistula combining an artery and vein in my arms. As long as it matures and heals up correctly, that's what we're going to switch to. But because it needs to mature and heal, that means I can't lift more than 10 pounds with my right arm now, because that's the arm where it happened. And even when it heals up, it's probably still going to be less than 20 pounds max that I'll ever be allowed to, because the fistula, which is right here in my arm, if that gets damaged, it's another surgery that they have to do. And it's not going to be easy to like just fix that. They're going to have to do a different thing. They might even have to do a graft at that point. So, I really don't want to go through more surgeries, any of that. That's going to be more weakness. So, again, I'm looking at this going, I literally had a nurse. I was so weak that he had to pick me up to get me into the dialysis chair. And so that's been the life I've been in. Now I've gained some strength back, but I've been so limited that I had to have friends from church actually come over to take out my garbage, because I can't carry it with a cane in one hand, with weight restrictions on the other, go down the stairs, walk over, because my dumpster is about as far away as I can get from where my apartment is, and so I have to walk all the way that way and then all the way back and then climb back up the stairs again. And literally I'm at the point where that is impossible for me to do. And that is a very humbling, and to me, I will also say somewhat annoying. It's a very humbling, annoying process of learning my new reality. I have to accept that I have to ask people for help now. And I may go into more details on that later. For now, I don't really want to dwell on that from this. I will just say I have been blessed, especially with my church and everything that they're doing to help me with this. But I still struggle with, A, the fact that I am at a point where I need it. I don't have a choice in that. And B, I don't know how long that this is going to continue, but all indications are pointing towards a long time. Not a couple of weeks, not a couple of months, but years and years. 5 to 7 years on average to get a transplant. And then even that might not be enough. Because at that point, if I get a transplant, I'm also going to be, from that point on immunosuppressants from that point on. So, long story short on that, I'm actually at the point now I basically have to give up having a normal life ever again. Whatever I choose to do, I have to be close enough to a dialysis clinic that I can get my blood cleaned 3 times a week, every single week. There is no vacation from that, as I said. I will never be able to pick up more than 20 pounds with my arm, or whatever the final verdict will be, what they will allow. It's never going to be where I can just go and work out what I want to do. In fact, right now, I can't even do the rowing machine that I have, because the sweat would get into this catheter on the center line. And as the doctor told me, moisture equals death with that, because bacteria love moisture. So, yeah, and that also means, yes, I can't take showers or baths at the moment. I have to do a sponge bath. And once, at least this part of it, once I can switch to the fistula, that's going to clear up a little bit. So with a fistula in place, I can actually do all of that, because I'm no longer going to worry. It's just needles in like an IV. And so when they pull them out, you get little bandages, but you don't really have to worry if it's going to cause a bacterial infection that goes straight to your heart. It's going to heal relatively quickly. So at least that part will relax in the hopefully immediate future. But I'm still, through no choice of my own, through no desires of my own, having to alter my life at least 5 to 7 years, and realistically probably forever, probably for the rest of my life. And that is a tough thing to take in. It's a tough reality to have to face. Nevertheless, I can say I'm glad that I can read the Bible. I'm glad I believe what I read. I'm glad that I can see that God never intends for people to be isolated and alone by themselves. he has his believers congregate in a church because community is necessary. It's part of his plan. And again, my church has been more than a blessing to me during this entire time, and how willingly they just came over and did what needed to be done that I could no longer do. And honestly, my workplace has also been an extreme blessing for me in this too, because my dialysis schedule conflicts with what I would be working. 3 days a week, one of them can be on a weekend, but that's still 2 days that are affecting a workday. And um, for me, it's a half a day on each, so that's a full day of work that ends up vanishing. But my work has been the workplace has been very, very lenient with me. They understand the issues. They've rescheduled what I have to work. My work no longer is required to be done on a time-based situation at all. It is simply making sure I do the correct amount of tasks that are assigned out to me, and they are doing realistic amounts of work for me to do. They're not giving me too much, knowing that I can't do it, and setting me up to failure. Instead, they are setting me up to succeed. They want to do that. And even though I complained earlier, even the insurance company has, I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush and say that what they did in forcing me to leave the rehab center before I was ready to climb stairs was a good thing. But leaving that aside, I met my deductible completely in January. And so that does mean, really, at this point right now, I literally am paying about 1% of what the hospital is charging for the whole thing. And I'm paying 0% of my outpatient physical therapy that I'm getting now. And I'm paying 0% of the dialysis costs that I'm doing right now. I don't know what will happen when January rolls around and I get a new deductible. How much this is going to be discounted from that. I know I'm not going to pay the full price even then, but there will be the deductible I have to get to. But that's still months away from me at the moment. And besides which, when it resets, I can go a couple of months with relative financial pain if I have to, and be fine. And so honestly, that's where I've been. And just to be clear, unlike a certain boogie who you might have heard in the news recently here on YouTube, first of all, I'm not lying about any of my conditions. And secondly, I'm not asking for any donations from any of you guys because I don't need them at this point. Overall, again, my insurance is great. My job is still paying me. I still have work, and I'm not losing out on any of that income. Now, things could change. I could deteriorate worse and not be able to do things, but I'm actually at the point where I am improving, not getting worse at this point. So I also don't have any way of getting a crypto scam for you. So I can't even do that if I wanted to. I'm too tired to look up the details on how to scam you. So you're not getting a crypto scam from me. I'm not begging for donations at all. What I will do is ask for any fellow believers if you would pray for me. I will never turn that down. But that's the only thing that I will ask at this point from you guys. Again, my church has stepped in. They've done a ton. My work has done a ton for me. My family has done a ton for me. So I don't need to get you guys involved. But again, this is one of those things where having to rely on anybody, in this case my church and even my family and all of that, it's a very humbling experience for me. And so, anyway, to wrap it up here with the YouTube side of stuff, I hope to be able to produce a bit more content from time to time now that I'm recovering. It is probably going to be less than what I had before, and I realize that people who have followed me for a while, there's a lot of times where I didn't have much content, and it might be longer now. If you don't want to stick around, I totally would get that, but I do intend making more videos moving forward, discussing various philosophical, theological, linguistic, historical, scientific, meteorological, logistic, whatever topics at any particular point of time tickle my fancy. And you guys would know how random that I can be, and this is going to be like that. And hopefully we'll get quite a few of these in the next, say, 5 to 7 years. Beyond that, too, of course, I'm expecting that something will happen, and we'll move forward from that. But either way, just wanted to give you that as a quick update. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and peace out.